Hi, welcome to identityweek.net. I'm Evie Kimsing, our editor. Today we're going to be speaking with Andromeda Security, who were the winners of our startup competition in 2024. They've developed an AI-powered ID platform that protects organizations against the threat of ID breaches, amongst non-human and human identities out there. It's really important technology, considering those threats out there. And I'm really pleased to say I'm joined by Ashish Shah. Um, Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today about your portfolio, really.
Looking forward to it, Evie. Thank you for the opportunity.
My first question is, can you just explain how the platform manages permissions and the lifestyle for human and non-human identities?
Sure, definitely. To set some context first, we all know, as you just mentioned earlier, that identities become the primary attack vector for any breaches that happen today in cloud or SaaS environments, right? Because identities really become the perimeter, and it's not if, it's when we'll get compromised. And so the focus is for Andromeda is on, well, if there is a breach, can we eliminate or at least minimize the impact of the breach? And the attack surface, if you will, is directly proportional to the permissions any identity has. The more overprivileged you are, the larger the attack surface. And unfortunately, over 95% of the identities today, both human and non-human, are overly privileged. And so that's why our focus is on how do we right size the permissions and eliminate the or minimize the attack surface of a breach. So, in order to do the permissions management right, you cannot do it manually. You cannot do it just because you're part of this organization. You have these roles and these permissions because it's too static. You can't scale in cloud and SaaS. So, we use two approaches, a combination of usage and risk. Our philosophy is that the true least privilege is where only frequently used permissions that are low risk should be part of anybody's standing or permanent access. Everything else should move to just-in-time access, just-in-time privilege access. For us to be able to do that, we analyze every identity's not just configuration, but actual activities, what they're doing in their applications in the cloud and the SaaS. And based on that, uh, we know which permissions are being used and not being used. Combine that with which of the permissions are risky, read permission, read for data, write, delete permissions, admin level access, versus which are not risky. Combine them and then bring down the every identity's permissions base to the true least privilege, which is frequently used low risk permissions. So it's a combination of risk and usage. That's the permissions part. The lifecycle part is again tied to which organizations you're part of as a human user. And for the non human identities, what type of NHI you are, what activities you're doing. And based on that, if you're inactive, for example, you should delete the NHI. If you leave the organization or move within the organization, you should remove or at least right size the permissions based on your new role. So, this is how we use context, we use risk, we use behavioral models to define the right set of permissions and also manage life cycles of identities.
What sort of permissions do companies currently have that protects their data? Um, or have you innovated this so that, it's really evolving? There's zero trust strategies.
Right. Now, I think zero trust is a philosophy. It's a journey, right? It's not a product. But the zero trust tells you from an identity side of things is um, you should have the minimum set of permissions required to do your job at any time and no more. Really, it's zero trust for identity is least privilege. And most organizations today have employed the same models or same set of solutions that they have done on premises into the cloud and SaaS, where every time an employee joins an organization, based on what role they're part of, they get certain birthright access, certain permanent standing privileges. That is the main issue with excessive privilege today in cloud and SaaS because that model does not work in the modern cloud and SaaS environment. So that is the reason why the legacy solutions are not able to solve the problem, and we're resulting in lots of security breaches because of identities. And that's where Andromeda is innovating, where we're taking a fundamentally different approach. We're using risk, we are using behavioral models, we're using dynamic context to define what permissions every identity should have. The second innovation we are doing is we're taking a platform-centric approach. Today, in the identity space, there are lots of fragmented solutions. You have solutions focused on just non-human identities, or just identity governance, or just a privilege access management. We're taking a platform approach. We think identity problem is a data problem where you need to centralize all context, all data, all configuration, all behavior related information into a single data lake. That's what Andromeda has done. And then on top of it, we run different machine learning models, AI models to derive the risk, the least privilege, the automated context for making decisions on just in time privilege access or managing the lifecycle of human and non human identities. So we have innovated on taking a platform centric approach with building behavior and risk models on top of it.
Thank you for explaining that. So, can you describe kind of the holistic role that AI has in this, in, protecting systems, behavioral analytics, everything that you mentioned there, you're using to create a holistic approach?
Definitely. I think the right way to think about this is AI is not a tool for all problems that they just throw at AI and it solves the problem, right? You have to take a more systematic approach. So that's where, as I mentioned earlier, right, we ingest all data into a single data lake. Once you have the data, once you have the context, where we every identity has a both a posture model, its behavioral model, and its privilege model. On top of it, we run different machine learning models, some Gen AI models, depending on the use case. For example, we have risk scoring machine learning models where for every identity, our models can derive a three-part risk around posture, behavior, and privileges. Similarly, we have anomaly detection models that derive or that detect anomalies for every identity, human or non-human, compared to its past behavior, as well as compared to its peers in the organization to see if there is already a bad actor in the organization. And similarly, we use in some cases Gen AI LLM based models for translating activity logs into an English language summary that's easily understandable so that you know what an identity did in or didn't do in a specific privilege session. So depending on the use case, we use different kinds of machine learning and AI models.
Thank you. I think a fascinating point that I picked up there is, you know, employees themselves may have too many permissions and it's not only the end user, but it's the staff, anyone who has access to organizations' data. It can be a threat as well. It's really fascinating to listen to you. Could you just explain a little bit more about your vision slogan? Even if an identity is compromised, there'll be zero business impact. I think that's a really powerful statement.
Yeah, it's a bold vision statement. So the idea there is, again, as I mentioned earlier, right? The attack surface of an identity-related breach is directly tied to the types of permissions, the riskiness of the permissions that identity has. So in an ultimate state, if for every identity at any given time, the permissions it has are only low-risk permissions that are frequently used. So even if you're compromised, the permissions that you have on a permanent basis are so low risk that there is very little that the attacker can do, then you've achieved that state where there is little to no business impact because all the high risk permissions have been moved to just-in-time privilege access. And just-in-time privilege access also, you don't give it to anybody who asks for it, right? You do context-based approvals where, well, let's say Evie is asking for a privilege access. Has Evie done this, accessed this before? Is she coming from the same location, same device? How is her behavior in the recent past? What about her peer behavior? This is the kind of context that's used to approve or not approve privilege access. That's what allows you to have that high security, the zero trust model, but also not impact users' ability, their agility, their productivity to do their business. So that's the balance we are striking with our approach and get to a state where even if your identity is compromised, there is zero business impact.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's fascinating to hear your kind of strategy model which goes beyond just one solution. Thank you.
Absolutely, Evie. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to solving hard problems in the identity security space for both human and non-human identities.